We've got funds, right? What is it? Katie Horn? Is that her name? Katie Horn?
Katie Horn was at A16Z. She started her own fund recently.
Didn't she raise like 1.5 billion for a Web3 fund? And there's all these funds are raising billions.
Huge.
A multi-coin.
I read somewhere something like 20, or I hope I'm getting this right, 20 or 25% of all VC dollars, it was either raised or invested last year, was crypto projects, which is crazy. And so, I mean, that will come down this year, obviously, but.
So they have an incentive to create this category called Web3.
Right.
But I don't believe the thing that they're explaining and talking about is making the web a better experience than like Web2 did, or like Web3 was meant to. I just don't agree with it. And I think Chris Dixon, Mark Andreessen are massively incentivized to make this a thing. And I don't know why. Maybe is it the latest thing they can make billions from? Is it because there's, we're beyond the tech boom. There's not as many ideas available. I don't know, but I just find it thoroughly. I don't like it.
So let me, for sake of argument, kind of make the counter case here, because it is interesting.
No, you're just meant to agree with me, and then we can move on to.
All right, let's go get beers.
Get back to bees.
Get back to bees.
So one aspect that we could talk about that's really interesting is the kind of decentralization of data, and users should retain their identity and have self-sovereignty over their identity, their data. Actually, I think a maybe even easier piece to look at is one of the things that Chris Dixon has talked about, which is I forget what he calls it, but there's a growth extraction process that plays out with pretty much every company. And you've seen this, I've seen this, right? So with pretty much any centralized company with a technology project early on, I mean, I'm thinking like Uber in the early days. It was fucking awesome in the early days. Mm-hmm. Press a button and a taxi shows up. The prices were very reasonable. The support was amazing. Anytime you had any issue, you send a message, and within an hour you'll get a response back, and they'll give you credit. Any tech product in the early days has to be super user friendly to acquire an audience, right? That's what you have to do early on.
And they have growth capital, so they don't have to be entirely profitable.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you get users?
Uber will never be profitable, but
can you get users?
That's the only thing that matters in the beginning, right? But how do you get users with great user experience, great support, just great UX, all these kinds of things, right?
You solve a problem.
And you do it 10x better than anyone has before. But the problem is that over time, the incentives and the dynamics change, right? For any company that has private investors, any public company, there is a growth mandate, right? They have to keep pumping the value of their equity effectively. And the way you do that is by over time slowly squeezing and beginning to exploit your users or turn your users into the product, right? Which is what's happened in social media. And the market is just set up in such a way that this is unavoidable. The classic example of this is Google saying "Don't be evil," and then 10 years later
be
deciding
a little bit evil.
Yeah.
We can be in China. It doesn't matter that they want us to censor what happened at Tiananmen Square. We'll do that.
And the incentives are such that no matter how good the early intentions of the founders are, they're kind of like forced into, again, there's these two options, right? One is acquisition and the other is IPO. And that forces them to.
Well, sometimes it's pre-IPO, sometimes it's post-IPO. So pre-IPO, you want to become as profitable as possible.
Sure.
So you maybe sack a bunch of staff, you stop spending money on marketing.
Exactly. So your support goes to shit, right? I mean, Uber is now absurdly expensive, especially in places like New York, and their support is just ridiculously terrible. You're lucky to get any response.
We should come back to that, by the way, because it's ridiculously expensive in New York.
Let's come back to it. Let me just finish this thought.
No, okay, but I'm with you. Or post-IPO, it's like your share price always has to go up.
Exactly.
Because if it's not going up, you're failing.
You're going to get fired. I mean, the reality is you as CEO of that company or chairman of the board or whatever it is, you're going to get a pink slip. You're done. You really, truly have no choice, right? So one argument in favor of something like Web3 is that you don't have to do that. You're not forced to ever sell or be acquired or IPO, right? Because the project is owned by the user. So it's a lot like a co-op, basically, right?
But it never is.
And therefore, you don't need to exploit your users or squeeze them and extract value from them. Another way of phrasing this, there's a project called Exit to Community. So there's a gentleman named Nathan Schneider who's a professor at University of Colorado, and there's a whole group that does research on this. And so they want to offer an alternative, right? If you are that high growth project and you have this community that's super active and they love it, shouldn't there be a way for the founders to kind of exit rather than to the market or to an acquirer, right? To the community. And maybe this doesn't look like billions and billions of dollars. Maybe it's an order of magnitude less than that, but the founders can be very comfortable. And at the same time, the community can take over stewardship of the project. So this is an idealized version of Web3. And I do believe that there's some potential for this. This has not really happened successfully. I think maybe the best example we have right now is Shapeshift. Do you know what they're up to? How they've been decentralizing Shapeshift from a company into a DAO effectively.
Yeah. But okay, so Shapeshift aside, the kind of projects that I've seen people investing in, it's a bit confusing because there's a token, but sometimes there's also a company which has equity.
Yeah. Well, the most common structure is a dual structure where you have a for-profit company and then you have something like a foundation, it could be an association, which is a nonprofit, which sort of controls the treasury, issues the token, maybe runs the ICO, and then like the for-profit company acts as a service provider to the foundation. This is kind of how these projects tend to sort of get around securities laws, things like that.
Yeah, but this is where it feels a little bit like bullshit because what you've done is you've created the equity which you as the company own, and then you've also created the token which you own part of, which you allow a bunch of people also to buy the token, but the company still exists. Like if the token was all that existed, and the token represented equity, I could partially see your argument. But in the end, the people who own the token want the token to go up in value because it's an investment. So either way, if you're buying something, you want the investment to be successful.
There's many. I think you're oversimplifying a little bit. So what I've seen, like as an investor, and to some extent the projects that I've helped launch as well, there's a menu of options you can choose from, right? So, and it's changed over time. So circa 2017, the really popular thing to do was the ICO. And the thing that the investors were buying was a SAFT, right? A simple agreement for future tokens. And there was no like equity component. And that fell out of favor for obvious reasons because, SEC began to kind of pay more attention and people began to say, well, a lot of these things probably are unregulated securities. And so instead of SAFTs, people started doing SAFEs, which are more traditional, right? Simple agreement for future equity. However, there's hybrid structures where the equity itself is tied to a token. So for example, like in the case of Space Mesh, we have a company. We have an operating company, which is like a Delaware C corporation or something. Every investor who owns a share of that company is entitled to some number of coins in the network. And the most likely scenario is that when the network goes live or shortly thereafter, called a year or two after, we will dissolve the company, right? And just leave the network and just leave the coins. Like that's one relatively clean way to do it. And it's a little bit like, again, what Shapeshift is doing. That company is going to be completely dissolved. There's going to be zero assets left. All the value is going to be held by the network. So I think that there are like healthy ways to do this.
But of course, you're going to say the space mesh is the healthy option because you're working on it.
Sure, no, I mean, I recognize my biases, and this is an experiment. And we haven't done this yet. I feel like other projects probably have done some version of this.
But I still feel like the whole thing is fundamentally dishonest. I think Web3 is a marketing term to sell the idea that we live in a world of tokens. And I think we've 6 years into the proliferation of tokens.
I mean, it really started in 2017, so we're 5 to 6 years.
5 years or 6 years. And pretty much every chart for every token looks the same, and eventually it tails off to death. It's like, how many times do you want to try this? How many times do you want to try this till you've been proven it doesn't work? Like, not everything is going to be decentralized. I just think it was like the Carl Salami thing the other day, where it's like, who's building Airbnb on Web3? It's like, oh, fuck off, man. We did this in 2017. It's like a bullshit idea. We're not going to put everything on a fucking blockchain. Look, Airbnb isn't perfect, but I like the fact that I can call up Airbnb and say, hey, I've got an issue with a booking. Customer service deals with it. Also, if I've got a property and I list it, am I going to list that on a decentralized network? I want it to be listed on a centralized network that is insured and has customer services. Right. So if someone comes in and fucks up my property, I can go to them and say, hey, there's a problem here. I just don't buy it. I'm not sure if that still puts me in status cut category, but I just don't buy it. Like, some things are going to be better centralized and some things are better decentralized. Money clearly is better decentralized because of the incentives.
Yeah.
But I actually like centralized things. I think some things built centralized are better.
I think centralization is good for user experience. It's good for support, like you're talking about.
It's good for accountability.
Yeah. So, the vision is that crypto economics, if you believe that that's a thing, and certainly a lot of Ethereum people do, right?
I don't.
The vision is that you can get accountability through crypto economics, through things like mechanisms like bonds, right? So you, as a participant in a network, you have to acquire a token, like a utility token, to become a service provider. So let's talk about decentralized Uber, right? That's a fun use case, right? In order to become a driver, I need to hold some minimum number of the tokens of this network, and I need to stake them. I need to bond them. And if I misbehave, if I don't respond to enough calls, or if I get too many 1-star ratings or whatever, then I'm going to get like quote unquote slashed, and some portion of those tokens are going to be taken away from me, and you get accountability through these mechanisms. However, it's fragile for the same reason that like algorithmic stablecoins are fragile.
Yeah, and it's similar to the idea that Michael Saylor has with Twitter, in that he wants you to have an orange check mark and you have to stake some Bitcoin and you lose that Bitcoin. I think there's some merit in it. And I think there's also some potential flaws in it, but I'm not opposed to the idea. But for me, that works because that is money. And I think with Twitter, they could do it two ways. If you want to be anonymous, you could stake some Bitcoin.
Right.
Okay. If you don't care and you want to, you can stake $10 of a stablecoin or whatever. I think it's possible to do something like that. But you're doing it with things that are accepted as money. The dollar is
I see where you're going with this.
The dollar is definitely accepted as money, and it makes sense. If I fuck with my Twitter account and I lose that $20, that is annoying.
Yeah.
And also, if I want to spam, if I want to do 1,000 spam accounts, that's 20,000. It's just a pain. It's just a pain. Okay, great. I get that. And that to me does kind of work. If it's another token.
Yeah, if it's a shitcoin.
Yeah, if it's a shitcoin, it's not really money. It's a shitcoin. And what if that shitcoin loses value? What, can I buy a load more shitcoins and then suddenly start attacking that network? And then suddenly it's like, well, let's look at a normal day, okay, or a normal trip like this. I have to get to the airport, so I need an Uber. So I go on decentralized Uber. So I've got my Uber shitcoin, and then I have to get on my flight. So decentralized British Airways. Then my British Airways coin.
Shittish Airways.
No, British Airways are good, okay. And then I get to New York and I've got to get to my Airbnb, and I've got my decentralized Airbnb. And it's like, how many fucking shitcoins have I got here? Yeah. How many different things?
Well, this is not very different than the way things work today, like needing different currencies in different places. And the stupid cards you need. I needed one. Actually, the London Metro is a good example, because you can actually tap any credit card on the London Metro to pay. They just introduced that here in New York, last year.
I come here and I just tap my card.
You used to need a Metro card. That's no longer the case as of like a year ago.
Yeah, but here, what I'm saying is, when I use Uber, it comes from the same account. Right. When I go to the shop and I buy myself like the deli and I get myself a sandwich, I just tap my card and pay, right? I don't need to think about that. I don't want to have to think with every single service I use, how much have I staked? What is the value of it? Is the value going up? Like, have I got my private keys? It's just too much. It's too much. I don't believe in it. I think it's bullshit. And I think, like I say, there are people with incentives to do this because they've made an awful lot of money off failure. They've made a shitload of money off failure because they've got exit liquidity for something that hasn't had product market fit.
I don't disagree with that.
I don't believe there will be a decentralized Uber. I just don't see it coming. And maybe I'm just like a luddard or what. But I just think we went through this in 2017 and it didn't happen. And we seem to be going through it now, and we've replaced IPO with Web3. That's ICO with Web3. And I think these people have incentives, and I think they're full of shit. And if you can do it, go and build it. Why do you need a fucking token?
Well,
I know why they want a token.
There's one obvious reason and one less obvious reason, right? So the less obvious reason is things like monetary policy. If you want to have any control over like minting and burning, minting in particular, you have to have your own token to do that. You can't do that you can't mint Bitcoin or ETH, right?
But why do you need to mint a token?
Certain crypto economic mechanisms might require you to be able to, dynamically to have monetary policy control, right? So to increase or decrease the token supply, things like that.
But why do you
macroeconomics?
Why can't you build the same decentralized thing but just use Bitcoin?
I think in nine times out of 10 you probably could just use Bitcoin, to be completely honest. But I think to say that there's no need for any token in any case whatsoever is disingenuous, because there are legitimate cases where you need either at the beginning, right? In the case of spinning up a decentralized shapeshift, to use that as an example, or a DAO or something, you need to be able to like mint tokens and hand them to certain people, right? Or maybe even have a more active monetary policy over the long run.
But are you minting tokens or are you minting pseudo equity? Because if you're minting pseudo equity, that makes sense. But let's not call it a token. Let's just call it a share, because we know what a share is.
Right.
And it's a share of something that you can sell. So are you minting tokens with a monetary policy, or you're minting a share? It's
a gray area, right? And this is where things get complicated, because
people benefit from gray areas.
When you call, yeah, sure. When you call something a share, which implies equity, right? That has a whole bundle of things that goes along with it. So shareholder rights, fiduciary duty on the part of the principals. You have the principal agent problem. You have all this kind of typical corporate governance stuff. You don't have any of that with tokens, and that's one of the problems, right? And as an investor, when you buy tokens, if you read the fine print, truly, it says things along these lines. It says you have no rights whatsoever. You have no shareholder rights. You have no governance rights, no voting rights. So it's kind of the perfect instrument for the issuer. It's shit as the holder of the token.